Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this investor webinar for Amaero International Limited. My name is Gabriella Holt. I am an Executive Director with Atomic Markets, and I'm very pleased to be joined today with Hank Holland, the Chairman and CEO of Amaero International Limited. I'd just like to remind everyone that today's call is being recorded. The structure of today's presentation will be a short statement by Hank before going into a fireside chat. If at any time you'd like to ask a question, please do so via the Q&A function, and we'll endeavour to answer all the calls on the presentation today. Just before we get started and I hand over to Hank, can I just remind investors that you're encouraged to read in detail the announcements of the company and the rights issue prospectus that was lodged yesterday. This call is not a complete statement of all relevant facts, and investors should consider obtaining independent financial advice on the company's rights issue. Okay, I'd now like to hand over to Hank Holland. Go ahead, Hank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabby. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the investor briefing. In light of the recently announced rights offering, we felt it was important to brief investors and to address your questions. As many of you may know, I am both the newly appointed Chairman and CEO of Amaero and the founder of Pegasus Growth Capital in the States. The directors, management team, and I are committed to improving the performance and the standing of Amaero. We encourage you to consider the opportunity to retain and to increase your shareholding in Amaero through the rights issue. I led the $11 million financing in May, largely premised on what I considered a positive macro backdrop. One, we anticipated that the US and allied countries would undergo a renaissance of advanced manufacturing. Two, with additive manufacturing at a tipping point, and with metal AM in the early stage of adoption, we felt that additive manufacturing was poised for strong secular growth. Three, due to the supply disruptions associated with COVID and the conflict in Ukraine, we felt there'd be a national security imperative to relocate critical manufacturing and critical materials out of Russia and China. Due to the conflict in Ukraine and heightened tensions with China, we felt there would be a significant increase in both aerospace and defense budgets, particularly in the US and allied countries. 6 months later, we remained steadfast about the macro and the secular forces. However, from a company perspective, Amaero has failed to execute and has failed to capitalize on the opportunity. After revisiting the Victoria powder manufacturing project schedule, cost, and suitability, the board decided to terminate the project. We appreciate the decision to terminate the project will extend the period of time needed for the company to achieve profitability. However, the pivot to explore alternative locations for the powder production facility allows for an improved capital structure, a larger scale operation, and improved unit economics. The board has decided to singularly focus on locating the powder manufacturing facility in the UAE and has decided to undergo a significant restructuring of the company's operations, management, and governance. Based on the canceled project, the restructuring, and the pursuit of the project in the UAE, it was decided that a capital raise would be prudent. Further, the board was committed to assure that investors had the opportunity to participate in the financing. Let me uncategorically state the obvious: the company has not performed as expected. Though I cannot assure you that we'll be successful going forward, I can assure you that we will strive for a culture that is performance and accountability based, and we are committed to communicate in a transparent, full, fair, and truthful manner. Within the confines of what's permissible, I'd be happy to address your questions. And as an aside, I arrived in Dubai late last night. I'll be here for most of the month of November and again for much of December, working on delivering the UAE project, and hopefully we'll continue to have some more updates coming shortly. With that, Gabby, I'll turn it back to you as far as questions.
Thank you, Hank. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please do so by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Hank, so just to perhaps start off our chat today, look, why was the proposed Victorian titanium powder manufacturing facility cancelled? And what about the lease and the other contractual obligations?
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. I'm sure this is on a lot of investors' minds, and it's a obvious and important question. The challenge was that once the company learned of the construction delay and the escalating cost associated with a facility, the board decided it was prudent to initiate a comprehensive review of the project. After analyzing the project's unit economics, the ability to expand the operations of the site, as well as the permitted uses of the site, we determined that a purpose-built facility located specifically in an industrial area was more viable. Also, as announced, we've estimated the restructuring cost equal $2.9 million. We expect the restructuring cost will satisfy obligations relating to the termination of the titanium powder manufacturing project in Victoria, as well as other restructuring costs.
Okay. So Hank, why build the project outside of Australia, and why did you select the UAE?
Yeah, so there's an answer specific to the project, and then there's a bigger picture answer, which is our longer term aspirations, which hopefully will include material operations in Australia. But as it relates to the powder manufacturing project, as we went about selecting sites and went out looking where would be most feasible to locate the project, considerations included could we have the most favorable capital formation, most favorable operating expenses, the cost of construction, permitting and construction schedule, which, as we know, had been delayed and escalated in Australia, a favorable economic and manufacturing environment, as well as a site that was well suited for our commercial customers, as well as export controls. On these bases and others, we feel the UAE is a very strategic location.
Okay, and following on from that, Hank, who is THC and Etmar Holdings? Can we have some details about them?
Absolutely. So one of the early things we looked at is, are we better off partnering with an organization that is strong in the local market, in this case, the UAE? And we looked at going the project alone as well as in a joint venture capacity. And albeit the final decision has not been made and won't be until we have signed binding contracts, we do feel a technology holding company, an affiliate of Etmar Holdings, is a very, very strong partner. Etmar Holdings is a leading, highly respected holding company in Abu Dhabi. Etmar and its affiliates are engaged in businesses that include energy, real estate, technology, many of which we feel these projects may well be synergistic going forward for the company. To the extent you're interested, there's more details on Etmar Holdings available on their website.
Okay, thank you, Hank. Just a reminder, if anyone wants to ask a question, please do so via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Hank, so turning more broadly to the opportunity in the UAE, what's the likelihood that it'll be approved and green-lighted?
So what I can add is that the UAE project has been conceived and structured in a very thoughtful and strategic manner, thinking not only about what's most expedient today, but what will best position the company going forward, and establishing a platform that allows us to really become a key supplier in pre-production powder, pre-production supplies in general. Relating to UAE, first, it's expected the project will be funded with a capital investment of approximately $290 million. It'll be contributed by a U.S. defense company that has an offset obligation in the UAE. For those of you who are unfamiliar with offset programs, these are contractual arrangements whereby a purchasing government obligates the supplier to reinvest some portion of the procurement contract back into its country. In this case, a U.S. defense contractor that has an offset obligation in the UAE would provide the project funding subject to approval by the offset administrator, and this would in turn satisfy their contractual obligation. The investment would primarily be used for capital equipment, and it's expected the capital equipment would be contributed to the joint venture. Second, Etmar Holdings is well established in the UAE and is actively involved, as I mentioned, in other businesses which may well be synergistic. Third, Amaero's advanced materials research, coupled with its advanced manufacturing know-how, are strategically important to the economic development and transformation of the UAE. The company is now focused on the UAE for the location of its metal powder production facility. The JV with Etmar is contingent upon receiving necessary approvals from Tawazun, the offset administrator in the UAE, and upon receiving funding commitment from the offset obligor. Though encouraged by the progress, this is a complex transaction We are early in discussions, and there's no assurance that we'll reach final terms or receive the necessary commitments.
Okay, Hank. We might just pivot a bit. I've got quite a few questions coming through now, just on some of the company's other projects. The first one, the company has been very quiet on ongoing projects such as Fletcher's, Boeing, Rio Tinto, Gilmore Space, and is 3D printing still a core part of the company? What about the sale of 3D printers? And will this also be part of the business going forward? And what has been the performance of the business, that part of the business thus far, i.e. have any printers been sold?
Okay, so a lot there. Let me start by saying that the company in its recent announcement shared that the next phase of the strategic review will be a comprehensive review of the company's geographic footprint today in Australia and the US, its staffing, and all commercial projects. The review and assessment of all commercial projects will include the scope and scale of the opportunity, the required investment, expected return on investment, the strategic nature of the customer relationships, and the milestone deliverables. I would add, and this will tie back to the earlier part of your question, none of the existing commercial projects have the prospect of significant near-term revenue. That relates to Fletcher, Boeing, the Gilmore project, etc. As for the 3D printing, the focus of this board will be how do we position Amaero to take advantage of our differentiated capabilities, to provide unmet need in the marketplace, and be a value-add trusted partner to our commercial customers. Our feeling was, as it relates to 3D printing equipment, we had no differentiated competitive advantage. There are numerous competitors that are well-funded, and there's also the risk of obsolescence as it relates to the machinery. We've terminated our distributor relationship with Amaero. We will exit the supply business of 3D printers, and we instead will focus on more closely collaborating with the printer ecosystem and providing them with consumables, i.e. our powder.
Okay, thanks, Hank. What about the relationship with the Monash Center for Additive Manufacturing? Is that still ongoing?
So it is ongoing. It's been a great resource for the company. Obviously, the company has its foundings in Monash and in the center. We'll here too look at in the continued review, what is the ongoing strategic benefit and how do we best collaborate with the university, with the center, with the national lab, with national initiatives in Australia. And so we'll look at this in a more comprehensive manner. Those decisions have not yet been made, and again, will be made in part of this ongoing review. We would hope, though no certainty, that we'll be able to report back to investors in sync with the year-end quarterly results, i.e. the end of January. It may be a bit pressing given the size of the review that we're conducting, but that would be our hope, is that we'd be able to come back with a significant update on the UAE project, as well as conclusions of the review relating to the overall operations, geographic footprint, as well as these commercial projects.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, when do you expect the UAE project to be cash flow positive?
Yeah, so one of the challenges, and we fully appreciate this, of canceling the Victoria facility is the company had announced it expected to be cash flow positive in 2023. It will not be the case going forward. The positive of the UAE project, it is much larger in scale, and I think will uniquely position the company to have a very prominent view of, a very prominent place in the overall supply chain of 3D printing, particularly for the aerospace and defense industry. That being said, given the scale of this project and the aspirations of it, we expect to have operating losses at least for 3 years. And we anticipate to have financial needs, working capital needs of about $78 million in the first 3 years. The term sheet with our JV anticipates that the working capital contributions would be made on a 50-50 basis between Amaero and our JV partner, the Etmar affiliate.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Next question, I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer it at this stage, given it's very early stages, but one investor online has asked, where will the technical staff come from to work on the UAE project?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's a complex question. If you think about it, the core piece of the project in the UAE will be powder production, powder manufacturing. We anticipate that, as announced for Victoria, there will be a large component of titanium powder. As we provide more scope on this project, you may well see that we're doing things in addition to titanium here as well. As it relates to manufacturing, we think that we will be able to find some very qualified Emiratis. They've got a very strong technical university ecosystem here, as well as in Tawazun. They've committed significant resources to their defense and aerospace ecosystem. We also, though, expect we'll have numerous highly qualified expats that will relocate or they're currently in the UAE. UAE, interestingly enough, which many of you may know, is almost 90% expats. So it's a very, very large expat community, highly skilled. That relates to the powder production. The other offsetting project will be, where do we locate the applied engineering and commercialization efforts? Today, that has been split between Australia and the US. Obviously, many of our end customers, the first tier defense primes, are located in the US. Here, what we'll look at is not only where do we get the best talent, but also considering export controls and other regulatory issues. Where are we better off locating that team and those efforts from export control and from intellectual property standpoint? There's a possibility part or all of that effort could be in the UAE. There's a greater possibility that a significant part of that effort will be in the US, but to be determined, and we would hope to also address that in this upcoming phase, the strategic review.
Okay, Hank. Next question. So who will own the patents relating to the project, and what's the scale-up opportunity?
So as for the scale of the opportunity, we have mentioned the capital investment, which is quite large, should give investors some idea of the scale of what we're talking about. We have not broken out the specific scope of the project, and we'll do that at a later date. As it relates to patent, anytime you go into commercial development or commercial project, the intellectual property is defined in agreements early on, and they vary project to project. It will also be the case as it relates to the applied engineering, the commercialization, as well as the powder manufacturing. We have, as you know, acquired equipment that was custom built for us that was made in Europe that will be shipped to the UAE, assuming we're successful here. But as it relates to other ongoing projects, the IP considerations will be negotiated on a project by project basis, all of which will be coordinated with the appropriate export control, ITAR, US DoD procurement, whatever it might be, regulations.
Okay. Next question, Hank. So what's the status of the gas atomizer that was built in Europe, the one originally for the Australian facility?
So the gas atomizer, which was custom built for us in Europe, it was almost a 2-year project. I believe it was 18, 19 months that was actually under construction, has been completed as announced, as well as tested extensively in Europe. Good news, the tests have supported that Amaero's parameter optimization has resulted in an industry-leading yield of high-value powder. We're encouraged by that and hope to continue to build on the technological progress that our team has made there. The plant is ready to be shipped. And so part of our consideration for the UAE facility and others is how quickly can we get a site constructed and ready to accept the equipment so that we can commission and begin operations.
Okay. And a related question to that from Hank is, so was having that equipment in place important in any way important in securing the new deal in the UAE?
Yes and no. It was not explicitly a driving force, but given the challenge of a go-to-market strategy, when you're having to custom build equipment that takes so long, no question it's a significant asset. And so the fact that we could potentially be fully installed and operational later in 2023 is certainly advantageous and would not have been the case had we not already custom built that facility. And likewise, what you'll find, the large project that we're talking about, $290 million, will include other assembly and other equipment that would be built over the next 2 to 3 years. So the full installation would occur over the next several years.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Turning to a question about key personnel risk, what happens if Jim Sears leaves the company? Who's going to run the project? And is there any expansion planned beyond the UAE, say to the US?
So both important questions, and both really speak to the aspirations we have for the company. Jim Sears, as many know, is incredibly well regarded and well positioned in both academia as well as the commercial landscape, particularly as it relates to optimizing the parameters at the nozzle of the inert gas optimizer, atomizer, that is. He's been very helpful. At the same time, I think what Jim has enjoyed, he's done a great job of, is really standing up our capabilities around him, and in fact, mentoring a number of people as well. With the Applied Engineering and Commercialization Center, we will be making some very, very key hires, not only building on the work that Jim has done around process optimization, but in materials, metallurgy. If you think about the mechanical engineering processes that are involved, thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, et cetera, these are all areas that we want to build very, very significant capabilities and, again, become a trusted partner of the industry. So yes, Jim is very important. And at the very same time, our plan is to stand up significant resources around him and transfer that knowledge the best we can over as quick a period as we can. As far as the US, I'm sorry, the other question there was to be determined, as I mentioned, as we go through and really think through the situs of each of these operations, the associated staffing of each of these operations, that will determine where we're located. It is very, very, very likely, given that most of our commercial customers are in the US, that we will over time have significant presence in the US.
Okay, thanks. Hank, now just a question on the board from one of the attendees. Can you talk through some of the board changes, and are you going to look to improve the board more in the future?
So as it relates to the board, as well as other changes relating to management, governance, broader operations, one thing that investors will quickly learn about me is I tend to mean what I say. I tend to say what I mean. And we will make mistakes, and we'll make more mistakes going forward. But I think you'll find we'll be very transparent about our approach. The approach of the board is clear. We have aspirations that are global for Amaero, and we're going to build board capabilities and management capabilities beyond Australia. Australia will continue to be an important part, and we'll continue to have important representation on our board in Australia. David Hanna, in particular, through this process, has been a real stabilizing force and has been really, really helpful. On the other hand, if you think about other areas where resources could be a driving force going forward, right? Having more capital markets experience in the US and developed markets, having very, very strong legal experience, both from an M&A and a capital markets perspective, having more technical expertise around the 3D printing ecosystem in general, as well as geographically. I would expect that we'll have a board over time composed not only of strong members from Australia, but also depth of resources in the US, the UAE, and other important places around the world. And we'll be very intentional the way we populate the board. And I think you'll see some of these announcements forthcoming as we've suggested.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Just like to turn to the Middle East project that the company's been talking about for the past couple of years. What's the status of that? And shareholders would like also to know how come you were able to make progress with the project in the Middle East as compared to previous management, and was it due to any margin reduction at all?
So first, humbly, let me state, we have not delivered the UAE project yet, and I'm hopeful we will. I think we're in a good position now, but don't give us credit yet. As it relates to the prior project that management has been discussing for a couple of years, it was in another Gulf region country. It was not in the UAE, somewhat similar in scope, somewhat different. But in the end, the decision right now is we feel that what best positions Amaero for long-term success, best positions us within the ecosystem, and best provide a strong unit economics and operating margin business is to focus on the UAE, deliver this project, and then build off of this project as a platform going forward. So our aspirations indeed are to be much beyond the UAE, but for a variety of reasons, I think this is the logical, and again, will be our singular focus as far as the place to build this flagship facility.
Okay, thanks, Hank. So just turning quickly to the capital raise, why was it necessary and why is Pegasus the sub-underwriter?
So once the decision was made to terminate the proposed Victoria titanium powder manufacturing project, to pursue the UAE project, to restructure the business, the board decided it was necessary to raise additional capital to fund the restructuring cost and to fund operations through mid-2023. Additionally, as announced for the financing in May, the company has capital expenses associated with the installation and commissioning of the gas atomizer, much of which still to fund. The board has intentionally pursued a financing structure that enables existing investors to participate in the financing, that enables the rights to be renounced by the investors who choose not to participate, and that enables eligible investors to overbid for shares above their pro rata right. Due to its strategic engagement and due to the existing shareholding, Pegasus is willing to support the rights issue in order to provide certainty for the company. Pegasus' enthusiasm for and commitment to Amaero is evidenced by my committing to the role of chairman CEO and by Pegasus committing to sub-underwrite the $10.5 million financing.
Okay, thanks, Hank. A couple of related questions to that. So just confirming that you yourself are taking up the entitlement offer, and after the capital raising, what shareholding would Pegasus end up having?
So prior to the shareholding or prior to the rights issue, as has been disclosed, Pegasus has a little bit less than a 15% position. We have committed to fund 100% of the rights issue shortfall. Our hope and candidly our expectation is that we will have significant participation by existing shareholders, both in the form of exercising their rights issue and also hopefully an overbidding to increase their shareholding. So we will see the rights issue closes on November the 25th. At that point in time, we'll have a better sense of what's left in shortfall. And again, Pegasus is committed to take that shortfall. Based on the shortfall, we would expect that the Pegasus position would be in the 30s as far as our interest in the company going forward.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Just another question on titanium powder production. How will the change in location and the delay with the Australian facility sort of affect Amaero's first mover or competitive advantage?
Well, it's an insightful question, and I don't think that any of us should be complacent with our position in the industry. As I mentioned, the testing of the atomizer in Europe has shown favorable results, and our optimization parameters have resulted in significantly higher yield of the smaller micron, higher value powder. On the very same time, the industry is progressing quickly. Others will continue to develop better technology, and we will have continued to advance our know-how as well. We do have a competitive advantage today. Hopefully by getting this first atomizer installed, it will enable us to build on these commercial relationships. I would also add, and this has been mentioned in prior announcement, we've had strong interest on offtake agreements. And we've also had strong interest in our commercial customers for the need of titanium powder. This goes back to my earlier point on the secular backdrop. There's an absolute strategic imperative to relocate the sourcing of the finished consumable to the US and allied countries. The UAE, given our arrangement selling arms to the UAE and the other countries in the Gulf, again, we think is a very strong place to locate this. Most importantly, again, as we relocate these capabilities outside of Russia and outside of China.
Okay. Hank, another question relating to titanium powder, previous management suggested that the Melbourne facility could generate 40 million worth of revenue, Australian dollars per annum. Is that still a reasonable assumption, and has anything changed to the price of the end product? Is the titanium powder that 3DA plans to produce now more valuable now in light of the issues with Russia? And in other words, how important is titanium powder produced by Amaero to the global defence and aerospace industry?
Yeah, great question. So if you look at the anticipated revenue from the atomizer, obviously there's a lot of driving assumptions. The key drivers, though, will be what is the percent of your high value, smaller micron spherical powder. The fact that, again, we do have a material advantage over the industry, that then results in a higher percent of that powder that can be sold as aerospace grade versus out of spec powder, if you will. The other obviously driving variable is what's the spot price. Spot price is always changing. On one hand, one would expect going forward that we will see an increase in supply as we relocate some of these facilities. On the other hand, all the experts believe the demand will grow faster than the supply, and thus we expect spot prices will be stable, perhaps increasing over time. So on the 40 million, we have not disclosed any number since then. The prior management did disclose initially a $30 million roughly estimate, followed by a $40 million estimate. That the $40 million estimate was reflecting the higher yield that tests were showing, which again has continued. We will take a conservative approach in our models going forward. We'll probably look conservatively at what is the uptime of the facility. We'll look conservatively at what is our best mix of offtake contracts versus selling the spot market. And so there will be a host of things. And again, we will tend to plan on from a more conservative perspective. We have not yet further announced anything on the revenue, but do know that is something that we're looking at and we will conservatively evaluate.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Okay, a tricky question now from one of the attendees. Is there any contingency or pending legal action against any former board members? And can you shed any light whether any of your substantial shareholders are looking to exit?
On the latter piece, I have met with numerous shareholder groups in both Melbourne and Sydney. I've had a close working relationship with PAC Partners. I've spent time with other broker dealers in the market. And not to my knowledge, I am unaware, or it hasn't at least been brought to my attention, that other significant shareholders will exit. I do expect, as naturally will be the case, there will be a certain turnover of the stock. And I'm very realistic that we have to reestablish credibility with the marketplace. We'll do so. We won't necessarily do so that I can assure you again through everything we do being successful, but we will absolutely do so in the way that we communicate with the marketplace and the nature of our planning going forward. The other question, Gabby, I'm sorry, remind me, was?
Legal action against any former, any other board members.
Yep. Here too, no, not to my knowledge. We're upgrading all aspects of the business. We brought on new legal counsel, EY Law, who's worked with us extensively through this rights issue process. And again, is a very, very diligent firm as far as we're going to go about the way we'll go about governance on a going forward basis. I'm not one to spend a lot of time looking back. I'm one to tend to focus forward and say, what can we do that's more positive for the company? And as you will see, I am very focused on looking at the company, the operations through the lens of our shareholders. We want to build shareholder value. We want to reestablish trust. We want to reestablish our place in the marketplace. And again, one step at a time, one decision at a time, one communication at a time, I'm comfortable that we'll do so.
Thanks, Hank. Obviously, there are a number of disappointed investors out there. We've got the capital raising out there. one shareholder wants to know, you want us to commit to further investment despite considerable disappointment in the past. Are there any details that you can give in terms of the business plan for the UAE project, or any ideas of expected profit or numbers?
Yeah, well, first, let me acknowledge, as I said before, and uncategorically so, the company's been a disappointment. In my 6 months as a shareholder, the company's been a disappointment. And so I absolutely understand the frustration of our investor base. And I'm committed to do better. And I'm committed to, again, have the mindset of aligning our interest, the company's interest, our employees' interest, the board's interest with our shareholders' interest. As it relates to the UAE project, particularly in light of us being in the midst of a rights issue fundraise, it's just not permissible that I say more than has been announced to the broader market. Again, we've given the market a scope of how large and transformative this project could be. It is still early. Once we have binding agreements, I would then expect we'll be able to come back and give a better sense of long-term profitability, as well as long-term impact on enterprise value. We do feel this will be a significant event as far as being accretive to enterprise value.
Okay, Hank, the next question, it relates to sort of Australian operations and listing here. I mean, if the UAE is a success, do you expect to still have operations in Australia? And are you, why are you still listed here? Is a US listing something that you're considering?
Yeah, so on the Australia operation question, again, this will be a real focus of the next phase of our strategic review. I can't imagine a scenario that we will not have an Australian operation. So the expectation is, yes, we will have an Australian operation. What I'm far less clear about is what will be the nature of that operation, the scale of that operation, and the staffing requirement of that operation, all to be determined. Mind you, our business is geared at the US defense prime ecosystem and allied countries' defense prime ecosystem, obviously Australia being a very important component of that. Moreover, the Australian market is a good market for emerging businesses. The US market, where I spend more of my time, we tend to fund these things via venture capital or growth capital. In Australia, the public markets have been very supportive of these type of businesses. So in the near term, the expectation is we would remain on the ASX, that we would reestablish goodwill and trust with our shareholder base. But absolutely longer term, we have significant aspirations for this business. And I could see us exploring a listing on a major exchange elsewhere in the world at some point in the future.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Focus back now on the Middle East and the UAE deal, just to clarify, because I think some people are a bit confused with this new project and the past Middle East project that the company was promoting. So the Middle East project that has been discussed for the past 2 years, if that's not progressed, why not? And just reiterating that the focus is on the UAE deal, not the past Middle East project.
So the prior Middle East project that had been discussed by the company was a significant opportunity for the business, given the mix of things it was working on at the time. That being said, the project in the end would not have been owned by the company. So the company would have received income associated with transfer of know-how, training, a host of other things. But we want to control our destiny. We want to build significant enterprise value. And thus it's important to me that we own the assets. Moreover, it's important to me that we think 2 and 3 steps ahead, not just about what's most expedient today, but what positions a company to be a large, successful company going forward that is relevant in the global supply chain, particularly pre-production supply chain for additive manufacturing. So that's the reason that we pivoted to UAE. Again, we've got favorable capital formation. I think we've got very favorable environment here to construct in as far as cost and schedule. And we've got a very, very attractive partner. It could well be the case that we seek other projects in the Middle East for other capabilities. If you think about the other aspects of pre-production supply chain. You can imagine that there might be other opportunities in other Gulf countries that would be synergistic as well as complementary to what we have planned to do in the UAE and our current stood up capabilities in the US and Australia. So not to say that I won't circle back at another project. I think we may well, but there too, it would be our aspiration to own the assets, not simply to be a service provider.
Okay, thanks, Hank. If the binding agreement to proceed in the UAE is achieved, at what stage or what timing is the obligors 290 million likely to come about? Is that an upfront payment or at the end of the 3-year period?
So a couple things to clarify in case it wasn't clear. The $290 million that is proposed that a U.S. defense prime, the offset obligor would fund, would be entirely for equipment. So good news, bad news. Bad news is from that $290 million, Amaero would receive zero in the form of net income, in the form of operating profit. The positive, however, though, is that the $290 million of assets as proposed would convey to the company, thus would be transferred to the balance sheet of the company in a 50-50 venture. Excuse me, roughly half of that, or $145 million, would hit Amaero's balance sheet. So that is a significant positive going forward and makes the point I made earlier about our desire to own these facilities and own these projects as opposed to be a service provider. The $290 million would be funded upon expense being realized. And as I mentioned, a fair amount of this will be upfront. We will commit to this equipment in the front part of the projects, which would involve significant non-refundable deposits to commission the construction. And then there'd be progress payments made. Roughly speaking, you could imagine that a significant portion of that $290 million would be funded in the first year and the second year, and then a smaller tail as the balance of the facilities were completed and installed. Here too, the plan is that we would likely be in a new purpose-built facility in the UAE in one of their established industrial parks.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Another question relating to that project. So how were you able to achieve this new deal so quickly? Was it Amaero's technology advantage? And are there many other deals of this nature being done globally that you know of?
The latter part of the question, Gabby, relates to, is Amaero working on another deal, or within the industry are there other deals? Do you know
There are other deals in the across the broader industry.
In the industry, okay. So to my knowledge, I'm unaware, not to say that there aren't, but I'm unaware of any other companies, major competitors in the global landscape that are looking at transactions such as this in the UAE today. Certainly the US defense primes are active in this marketplace, but they're not looking to operate facilities such as this. How are we able to do it? Well, as I prefaced earlier, we haven't succeeded yet. I have spent my career in capital markets and finance and joint ventures and structured transactions. This happens to be something that I'm pretty good at, and I think I bring a bit of value to. We will relentlessly pursue this deal, and in parallel, we will relentlessly pursue Plan B, Plan C, alternative structures in case something does not materialize with what we're working on. And that will be our focus going forward. As I said, from a cultural standpoint, we will be a culture of performance. We will be a culture of accountability, and we'll be a culture of calling it straight. But don't give us credit yet. Again, it's promising where we are. We have not yet executed. Give us some time and judge us on our actions. But I do feel good about where we are, and we will continue to work on other parallel scenarios so there are no surprises and we're not left without a project, if you will, at some point in the future.
Okay, Hank, again, I'm not sure if you can answer this question given the early stages of the project, but what's the expected footprint of the UAE facility? Can you give any idea of what size you're looking at?
Yeah, so we have, this is one of the challenges candidly with Victoria. The Victoria facility, by nature of its proximity, it was not a purpose-built facility on a greenfield site. It was a redeveloped site in the midst of a highly developed area. And as a result, it was a fairly small facility that in an ideal scenario wasn't well suited for the process flow and the operations that we have in mind. That being said, the UAE facility, we have not announced the specific scope. We are discussing that as we speak, but it will be much, much larger than what was anticipated and what was proposed in Victoria by the scale of many. And I would hope that we will have a better sense of that in the coming weeks or coming months. And that'll be part of what we report back to investors on once we have a binding term sheet. I might add, and I'll reiterate this probably again, we felt it was appropriate to give the market a sense of the UAE transaction, even though it is a term sheet, because of the scale of the transaction and because of the fact it could in fact be a transformative transaction. It will not be our policy going forward to announce transactions prior to having a binding term sheet. I'm sorry, a binding contract signed. Again, it will not be our policy to announce term sheets. We will be conservative in this nature. We will wait till we have binding contracts. Just the same, unless there is a continuous disclosure requirement, we don't plan to provide company updates out of cadence of our quarterly reviews. I believe those are better suited to provide in context of the quarterly review, unless again, something is required from a continuous disclosure perspective. So stay tuned, more to come. And once we have the binding announcement, we'll provide full details on the scope of this project.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Just a few final questions for you. And just a reminder to everyone, if you want to ask a question, please do so via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So just in terms of the binding agreement, what are the next steps to get that signed, and what happens if it doesn't go ahead?
So I'm in Dubai, as I mentioned. I arrived late last night. It's early here in the morning now. I will be here for the next several weeks. I return to the States for some family time over Thanksgiving. I think I'm there about 5 days. I turn around and come back, and we'll be here for most of the end of the year, and would expect to be co-located in the US and UAE next year, but with a preponderance of my time spent in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The next steps are driven really by three parties. As I mentioned, the joint venture arrangement is contingent upon getting the offset administrator's approval. In the UAE, it's an organization called Tawazun. We have meetings scheduled with leadership at Tawazun, coupled with our JV partner. Also, it's required that we have a U.S. Defense Prime commit to the funding. Again, there too, we've had preliminary discussions, as has been announced, but we will need to advance those discussions. And then finally, we will need to design, break ground, and execute upon the construction as quickly as we can to go to market here. So those will be the next steps. Most importantly, will be the Tawazun approval, the offset obligors approval, commitment, and then finalizing the structure with a JV. It's a very complex transaction. There's no assurance we get there, but I would hope that we will make material progress between now and the end of this year.
Okay, thanks, Hank. The next question relates to the capital raise and also Stuart's shareholding. He's got quite a large, he's one of the major shareholders through his company, Innoviz. Should shareholders be concerned about a potential stock overhang at all in this?
So stock overhang, I guess there could be two ways to interpret that. Shortfall from the issuance itself and or overhang after the issuance. Not knowing what's intended, I'll address both. We purposely underwrote the rights offering because we did not want there to be overhang on the stock after the rights offering. You'll notice it's a fairly long rights offering with the issue open until November the 25th, hoping to give all shareholders the opportunity to participate. We will then step in and we will invest the required amount of capital to complete the rights offering and assure that there is no holdover from that. On a going forward basis, we hope that we'll have a renewed shareholder base and that there will be renewed enthusiasm for the company. Relating to Stuart Douglas specifically, I'm not aware that they plan to sell their position. To my knowledge, they plan to continue to be a shareholder. And as I said, we're unaware of any other large shareholders that have mentioned their desire to sell. But look, it is incumbent on us, on the management and the board, to reestablish trust and to give investors a good reason to be an investor in this business and to stay with us as we attempt to build out not only the opportunity in the UAE, but other opportunities as well.
Okay, thanks, Hank. Sorry, just one other question, just a reminder, we'll wrap it up shortly, but if you've got any questions, please do so via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I've got a couple more questions for you, Hank. Previous dealings with defence primes has been problematic for Amaero in the past. How will you deal with them more effectively if you require their finance to get the deal completed?
Well, I think there's perhaps two parts of that question. If you're dealing with defense primes on a procurement project, and so you're qualifying parts, you're qualifying powder, such as we've attempted to do with Boeing as an example in the past. For all suppliers, including Amaero, this is a very long process. The nature of qualifying new components, qualifying new materials, again, is simply a long, complicated process. And that won't change. We will continue to partner with those commercial customers. We'll continue to try to add value and build strategic relationships. But the process is largely what the process is. Relating to UAE and relating to a U.S. defense prime being an offset obligor is a different scenario. So the real issue there is U.S. defense primes have been actively selling arms and other projects to the UAE for many years. They've had large procurement contracts. As part and parcel of those procurement contracts, they entered into contractual offset liabilities in the UAE, and those offset liabilities need to be addressed, need to be satisfied as part of ongoing sales to the UAE. We feel we have a very good relationship with the parties that head up those offset obligations for the U.S. primes. We are in discussions, seems to be going well. Talks are progressing, but there too, we will update investors separately. But again, not to be confused, this is a separate process than simply working on long life commercial projects and procurement with the U.S. defense primes.
Cool. All right, so we might have just have time for one more question, Hank, and I know you've covered this a bit before, but I think it's pertinent to close on this question. But, you know, just reiterate your plans for communicating with investors going forward now that you're the chairman and CEO.
So communication and dealing with investors is something that I feel very strongly about, as is good governance. The executive leadership and the board are absolutely committed to communicating with investors in a transparent, full, fair, and truthful manner. And going forward, as I mentioned, we do not plan to announce opportunities prior to having binding agreements. Likewise, unless otherwise required, as I mentioned, we will not be providing guidance or updates unless we must do so to comply with continuous disclosure requirements. We plan to report company updates in conjunction with quarterly results. And also importantly, and I've spoken to Gabby about this, we will plan to hold regular investor briefings, and they'll really be as a town hall. There'll be more of a live exchange of discussion with investors each quarter. in conjunction with our quarterly ASX filings. And so I would expect the end of January, we will be back. If we have material updates, binding updates prior to that, we will provide that. Otherwise, I would expect towards the end of January, we will have another investor briefing and a live exchange of questions and answers. I also will expect to be back in Australia and look forward to meeting many more of our investors in person and seeing again some of those who I've already met. Gabby, I very much appreciate your time in facilitating this. Investors, most importantly, we very much appreciate your continued support. Acknowledge this has been a tough ride, and we'll be committed to do all that we can do to build shareholder value in Amaero going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hank. Thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon. If you have any further questions, you'll see Hank and my details at the bottom of the latest ASX announcement. But thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.